Welcome to the Explainer. Listen, if you're involved in global trade, manufacturing, or supply chain management, the landscape literally just shifted beneath your feet. The European Union's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, better known as CBAM, has officially moved out of its prep phase and straight into definitive execution as of August 2026. Today, we're breaking down the massive new guidelines just dropped by the European Commission, what they actually mean for global exporters, and how you can use these new rules to completely outmaneuver your competition. Okay, let's dive into this. For the last couple of years, the main question echoing through corporate boardrooms was pretty simple. Do we need to comply with CBAM? But today, we're seeing a massive psychological paradigm shift. The question is no longer about basic compliance. The absolutely critical question today is, can we produce the reliable, verifiable, and auditable carbon data that European importers are now demanding? It is a completely different mindset. To get us up to speed, we're going to hit 5 quick steps today. The verification era timeline, decoding those August updates, mapping out the carbon data chain, a 6-layer operating model, and finally, this whole new competitive dimension. By the end of this, you'll have the exact blueprint to turn this from a regulatory headache into a massive global advantage. Let's get into it. Part 1, the verification era begins. Now, to truly understand what's at stake here, we first need to look at the definitive timeline we're working against. From 2023 to 2025, companies were basically in a learning phase, right? Figuring out how to calculate things and reporting on a best effort basis. But guess what? The honeymoon is officially over. 2026 is the urgent year. Right now, exporters have to actively measure and document their actual emissions. Why? Because 2027 brings the hammer down. That is when independent verification and strict financial declarations become mandatory. If you treat 2026 as just another practice year, you're going to fall way behind. And this brilliantly illustrates the big shift. The old mindset, you just estimate your emissions, hit send on a report, and call it a day. The new reality, brought on by the August 24th guidelines, demands rigorous, active data governance. You have to measure, then document, properly calculate, get it verified by an accredited third party, and only then do you report. We're talking about a fundamental transformation of carbon accounting, moving it from a background compliance task right to the front line of your operations. Section 2, decoding the August updates. So what actually triggered this massive shift? Let's unpack the rapid-fire technical updates the European Commission just dropped in mid-August. On August 14th, the Commission released 10 critical guidance documents specifically built for non-EU operators. So if you're exporting iron, steel, aluminum, cement, fertilizers, hydrogen, or electricity into the EU, you are directly in the crosshairs. But here's the catch. Compliance isn't just a copy-paste job across these industries. An aluminium plant and a fertilizer plant have entirely different production processes, right? These new sector-specific documents mean you absolutely must map your exact production process against the specific CBAM methodology for your specific industry. Then, another major update hit on August 10th, and this one was all about default values. Default values are basically generic emissions metrics you fall back on if you don't have actual verified data. The Commission just published corrected versions of these, but hear this loud and clear. Leaning on these generic defaults is a massive strategic risk. They're highly, highly conservative. Honestly, think of it like a punitive tax bracket you get tossed into just because you didn't keep your receipts. If you're running a relatively clean facility, but you have to use default values because your data tracking is messy, you artificially inflate the carbon liability of your goods. You are literally weakening the commercial attractiveness of your own product. Section 3, the carbon data chain. This leads us perfectly into how these regulations actually ripple through the global economy. Let's trace it all the way back to the plant floors outside of Europe. There is this huge myth floating around that CBAM is just a problem for European importers to figure out. It's absolutely not. It's a global supply chain data challenge. Take India, for example, a major industrial exporting economy shipping massive amounts of steel, aluminum, and chemicals. For Indian manufacturers, and honestly exporters worldwide, CBAM is an immediate market access issue. The European importer has the formal reporting obligation, sure, but the actual data they desperately need originates thousands of miles away on a non-EU factory floor. So the crucial point is this chain reaction. The whole system starts with a non-EU producer. They generate the emissions data, which goes through verification, gets handed over to the EU importer, who then files the CBAM declaration and surrenders the financial certificates. If that very first link, the data from the non-EU producer, is weak, unverified, or just a rough guess, the entire compliance chain fails for the European customer. And you know what happens next? That customer is going to go find a new supplier. Because of this chain reaction, the whole internal dynamic of your company has to change. Our source material really hits the nail on the head here. Quote, "It is no longer simply an ESG department issue. It is an enterprise governance issue," end quote. You cannot just toss this over to the sustainability team and forget about it. Your procurement departments, your plant managers, the IT teams building out your digital architecture, the finance teams forecasting certificate costs, they all have to be intricately involved in this. Section 4, the 6-layer operating model. Okay, so knowing all this, how do you actually execute? Here is the exact strategic playbook exporters need to adopt right now. You need to implement the 6-layer operating model. It kicks off with mapping, knowing your exact products and the specific facilities making them, because different plants have totally different emissions profiles. Next up is data and calculation, gathering raw emissions from fuel, electricity, and raw materials and converting them using those strict August 14th methodologies we talked about. Then comes verification, making sure it holds up to that strict 2027 independent scrutiny. But finally, layer 6 is governance. Governance is literally the glue holding the whole shebang together. It asks who actually owns this process. Without governance, even the most technically sound data systems are going to fall apart the second regulations shift. Section 5, the new competitive dimension. Let's move to our final section and see how all of this fundamentally reshapes the nature of global trade. Now, what's really interesting about the scenario is the new reality of winning contracts. Just imagine two steel exporters, supplier A and supplier B, both selling identical products into Europe. Supplier A hands over limited emissions info and leans way too heavily on those generic default values. Supplier B, on the other hand, comes to the table with plant-level monitoring, documented methodologies, and fully verified emissions reports. The European importer is looking at very real financial liabilities based on the carbon in these products. Supplier B instantly provides that importer with much stronger data confidence, lowers their regulatory risk, and, let's be real, almost certainly secures the contract. Historically, global manufacturers competed on price, quality, delivery, reliability, technology, and scale. We all know the drill. But carbon intensity has officially emerged as a core vector of global competition, right up there with price and quality. If you can prove you have significantly lower verified embedded emissions, that is incredibly commercially relevant. It's driving major investments into renewable electricity, process optimization, and low-carbon raw materials. So you see, CBAM isn't just some border tax, it's a massive industrial transformation mechanism, literally forcing global supply chains to modernize. And heads up, you can't just build for today's rules, because those rules are expanding. The EU Council is already looking at extending CBAM coverage to select downstream products and bringing in new anti-circumvention measures. The exact legislation is still moving, but the direction? Undeniable. Businesses have to build flexible, robust digital carbon data architectures right now, instead of just designing a rigid strategy around today's limited list of products. Your ERP systems, energy management software, and carbon accounting platforms all need to talk to each other seamlessly. The winners in this next phase of global trade aren't necessarily going to be the ones producing the absolute cheapest materials. The true winners will be the companies who can prove, with highly credible, independently verified data, exactly how much carbon is embedded in what they sell. Building your carbon data capability is no longer an optional add-on. It's the definitive key to your future market access. So ask your teams tomorrow morning, will your carbon data secure your market access in 2027, or will it lock you out?